Zelensky's trip to Washington, D.C. with his super friends. In this case, the super European friends, right? The G7 allies, the heads of Italy and France and the UK and Germany. And clearly, everybody's figured out how to placate Donald Trump, right? Everything is about placating him. And, whether I think somebody referred to the phrase tongue bathing Trump is what Zelensky's finally learned to do. He even showed up in a nice looking, very modern looking suit. Let me just tell you, if I would hope that this becomes the model of what is considered dressing up in Washington, because there was no tie, right? How great was that? There was no tie. It looks sleek. The all black look helps you look thinner. I need to look thinner these days. So, hey, I endorse it. Let's see it come. But in all seriousness, you could see that this was a case where that the European allies and Zelensky were hoping if they're the last person in the room. And as you could see, Trump seems to be vacillating. And it's interesting here that he sees himself more as a mediator between the two sides rather than as an ally of the West. It is weirdly head scratching, right? He's the one that would leave the room and go talk to Putin for 40 minutes to see what was possible, right? He was the go-between. Now, he does have the best relationship among the G7 leaders with Putin, right? Before Trump, when Biden was in office, and even actually during the Obama years and even the first Trump term, it was thought of as Merkel, who had the best relationship with Putin, in part because he spoke German, and so they seem to be able to communicate better than the other world leaders. These days, it really is Trump who apparently has the best relationship with Putin. So, look, I think it all went, it could have, I guess the best headline on all of this over the last 96 hours is it could have been worse, right? It wasn't Helsinki when it came to Putin, and it wasn't February when it came to Zelensky. And for that, I think everybody's grateful. And I think part of that is the effort the Europeans have made. I mean, and in some ways, perhaps Trump deserves some credit for this, both in action and inaction, right? The inaction has sort of forced the Europeans to start working more together, to start thinking about security, which actually is some of the rhetoric we've heard from some on the right who've said, hey, you heard J.D. Vance say it, that Europe has been a bit free. I think he referred to them as freeloaders at one point when it came to American security. And the fact is, if this is not, I think Trump's been a wake-up call to Europe, right? Which is the assumption that America was always going to be there. You never know which way America could turn. And suddenly now the instability of the partnership with America has forced Europe to rethink how it conducts its alliances, rethink its continent security. And in that sense, if you're on the right of center and wanted the U.S. to have a smaller footprint when it came to our national security, our commitments, then this is a victory because it's Europe that's taking the lead on defending Zelensky. It'll be a European. I'm trying to figure out, how the Russians view, Putin's red line is no NATO troops in Ukraine providing security. But if it's a collection of European troops, what's the difference? If all those European countries are members of NATO, is that a distinction without a difference, or is that just enough to placate Putin? Right? I think that's going to be an important moment. There's no doubt. Look, politically, you're not going to be able to sell in this country putting American troops in Ukraine. Okay, so this is not that is off the table. I'm not sure there would be bipartisan support for that, to be honest. There is definitely an exhaustion from American national security commitments still when it comes to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I don't think that there would be the political will in this country for that. The question is, if it's an alliance of European countries that are providing it, how, to me, NATO and European countries are kind of one and the same thing. Is that the way Putin is going to see it? Which sometimes he chooses to see it that way and sometimes he doesn't. So I think that's an important sticking point. But I want to get at one aspect to this that is still, which to me, and perhaps it's why Trump is still gettable by the West here for them to take their side. First of all, I think it is pretty clear that unlike most issues, there really is multiple points of view inside the West Wing in Trump's ear. That unlike many other issues, there's a healthy debate internally about Ukraine. Some that see Putin and Russia much more as a threat to the West than others see Putin and Russia. So I think the fact that there's that spirited debate inside the West Wing and that Trump seems to vacillate a little bit is why we have this sort of weird sort of takeaways from this last 96 hours, right? Which I do think, and I think there's part of the more Europe flatters Trump, it clearly works, right? Just like it's worked for Putin. The Europeans have figured this out. Trump just wants respect, right? He may not have earned the respect, but he wants people. I was saying this before. He's in some ways desperate for it, right? It goes back to his complex about, being an outer borough kid trying to make it in Manhattan. He's, at the end of the day, he's been wanting to be respected by the New York Times, respected by the elites. And the less they give him respect, the angrier he gets, and the more goes against the elites. But even as he goes against the elites and he tries to build his if he's paid, he still wants the elite awards, right? If he doesn't actually care about the elites, why does he want a Nobel Peace Prize? Right. But in some ways, he still craves it. Right. And I think that the Europeans have finally figured this out. And are placating them in ways that you look at it and you may just shake your head, kind of laugh that this kind of stuff works. But it does get me at one point in a huge miscalculation by Putin. I do think that Putin really has very low regard for Trump and thinks Trump is really easy to manipulate. Why do I say this? Because he's given Trump nothing. And he pays him lip service. Right. He tells Trump what he wants to hear about mail-in voting, what Trump wants to hear about whether the war would have started if Trump had been president or not. But he never actually gives Trump a win that Trump is asking for. Right. The fact that Putin couldn't even give him a 1-week ceasefire, couldn't even give him a ceasefire during the time that they were meeting in Alaska, couldn't give him a ceasefire just for the 72 hours that he was playing shuttle diplomacy between Putin and Zelensky. That is total disrespect by Putin, right? It totally should undermine the idea that Putin wouldn't have launched this invasion of Ukraine had Trump had been president. If he respected Trump so much, why can't he even give him a temporary ceasefire? And I think Putin thinks he can just pay lip service and not actually have to match the lip service with an action. I think he's miscalculating. I think this is success. I think over time, Trump, he has said it a few times. I think Putin's tapping me along. Remember, he said that at one point. And the fact that this is where Putin's never going to have, maybe he has ambition that he's going to have an even more pro-Russian, more pro-Putin president after Trump. I don't know who that would be, but maybe he somehow fantasizes about that. But I think it's safe to say this is going to be the most friendly leader that he's ever going to have in the United States. So to not enhance his reputation at a time when he's desperate to enhance it, not to help him get his ceasefire, get his peace prize, give him more credibility with the West, with a guy that you have influence, really seems to be a mistake on Putin's part. And I think it tells me how myopic Putin is, how sheltered Putin is, how much he doesn't quite see the world very well. And the miscalculations he's making on this, right? He thought he was going to roll over Ukraine. I mean, he is not getting very good intelligence. It's pretty clear if he was, he never would have probably done the invasion in the first place. They really thought this was going to be quick and easy, and they were wrong. And they continue to be wrong on some of the military capabilities of Ukraine. They continue to be wrong about the ability to divide Europe from the United States or to divide Europe amongst itself. And so I think he's done it again. And he had an opportunity to give Trump more leverage. Trump has more leverage over him that he refuses to choose, right? I mean, to me, it's a simple way to get Putin here. Just say, look, come out and say, the more I think about it, I'm going to put Ukraine in NATO because I don't ever want to see another war again. It's pretty clear Putin won't touch a country that's a member of NATO. And see how fast Putin might suddenly retreat and talk about a ceasefire. But he's never used that leverage, right? Trump has not used the leverage that I think he has. But the same goes for Putin. Putin has an opportunity here to essentially give a few wins to Trump that would enhance his reputation, and only while still preserving that personal relationship he has with him. So again, a lot of times I really want to be dispassionate and looking at these things and just sort of like saying, hey, wait a minute, forget what you think is the right thing to do. Try to figure out, why isn't he doing this? And this is a bit of a mystery to me. But I think it has to do with he's getting bad information, he's getting bad intelligence, or he thinks that little of Trump, that Trump has been so easy to manipulate with words that he doesn't have to bother with an action or two to give Trump a win or two that would ironically strengthen him. It's and which of course would be, but that would be long-term thing. And normally Putin's usually thinking long-term. He really is miscalculating this one, and I think does leave it up for grabs. And I think the more you look at Putin's actions, you realize he is nothing but a thug who wants to take over a sovereign nation. And there's only one person that can stop the killing. It's him, right? Ukraine could put down arms tomorrow, and he's not going to stop the killing until he gets that country. So it is on him. And so I think we need to ask ourselves that question. And it's certainly a question that I'd love to get more clarity from our intel community, but I'm not sure how public any of that can be because it's so sensitive when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump, right? But why is Putin sort of not giving Trump a little something here? Because it would actually help him, both of them, in the long term, which you would think. Again, I go back, Putin's never going to have a president who's this, let's just say, supportive, probably in 100 years, and if not even more, maybe ever. So this is where I think Putin is making some strategic mistakes here, because he's now unified Europe in a way that Europe wasn't unified before the invasion, right? It continues. He may have successfully, cracked the American partnership with Europe thanks to Donald Trump, but in doing so, he's united Europe in a way that the U.S. could have only dreamed about 10 years ago.